Jeff Slauson here from 19 News Now at the 19 News digital desk. The Cleveland Browns and the city of Cleveland pretty much are heading to court here when it comes to the Browns' possible relocation to Brook Park. On December 30th, the city of Cleveland sent a letter to the Browns requesting that they acknowledge the Modell Law and say that they will follow it. Now, what is the Modell Law? For those that are unfamiliar with it, it is something we've been talking about a lot here at 19 News, and of course the Browns have been discussing quite heavily. Prohibits a team from leaving Ohio or an area, relocating an area in Ohio, unless they come to an agreement with the city or offer the opportunity for the city or an organization to purchase the team. The law is very gray-filled. There's not a lot of clarity into how that actually would happen. And the city said that they would try and use it to keep the team in city limits. Now, the Browns have said flat out in response to that December 30th letter, good luck. We are not going to abide by it unless a court tells us we have to. And so it seems that is where we are headed. I wanted to get some expert opinion on this, and in particular, what actually is the legality of the Modell Law and how does this work? So we reached out to law professor at Case Western Reserve University, Eric Chafee. A fantastic interview here. A lot of great insight. Let's go to it now. Eric, let's just start off here with the general confusion. When it comes to the Modell Law itself, there seems to be a lot of gray in this. Is that an accurate feeling from someone who's just reading the Modell Law for the first time?
Yes, that's correct, for a couple of different reasons. First off, if you look at the language of the law itself, it is relatively vague. What does it mean to have an opportunity to purchase a team, for example? But beyond that, this is a relatively unique law. In many instances, you'll have laws that look like other laws that have been interpreted quite a bit. And as a result of that, we have a lot of questions here, and they're questions that, will likely need to be answered by a court.
And that does seem to be where this is headed. On December 30th, the city sent a letter to the Browns asking them to confirm that they will abide by the Modell Law. The Browns essentially said no, according to the documents that we saw yesterday, and it looks like this is heading to court. Now, in a situation like this where there has never been the actual use of the Modell Law, how can it be determined on the legality if there's never been an actual application of it, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, how difficult can that be to read how it would be used if it's never been used?
Yeah, that's a great question. Ultimately, interpreting the law, interpreting statutes is something that courts are charged with doing. They do it in a whole bunch of different ways. Some courts will start with the plain language, but even beyond that, you look at how similar laws have actually been interpreted, and then you think about things that surround the law. Specifically with this, we know that there are a bunch of different constitutional issues that may arise, including things going along with the question of whether or not it's too vague to be enforced, whether or not it may get in the way of existing contracts, and whether or not it in fact may be an improper burden on commerce.
As you see it, as you read through everything, do you feel like the Browns have a legitimate case to get it proven that they do not need to abide by the Modell Law?
That's a great question. I mean, ironically, the Haslams tried to use this law, or at least suggested that they were going to use this law when they ended up acquiring the crew, which, I think weakens their position. But there is a lot of ambiguity here. It's one of those things where to get to an enforceable version of this law, the court may have to be willing to do some imagining in regard to what exactly the legislature was saying. But, it is one of those things where, we'll probably just have to wait and see what the court actually says.
Yeah, Eric, I got to be honest with you. Hearing the court might have to do imagining is very strange when it comes to a law. I mean, this is a legitimate law in the state of Ohio. But as you mentioned, the Haslams threatened to use this previously. So does it weaken their case, you mentioned this a little bit, to now say it shouldn't be a thing when the city, the state can point to the Modell Law to say this potentially led to you expanding your sports empire?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, it's one of those things where the law, despite the fact that there's a lot of time that goes into drafting it and courts spend a lot of time interpreting it, there is some give and take to it. And whether or not you have a likable client, a client who has acted properly in other circumstances, really can be important in regard to winning a particular matter. So I do think that that will probably at least be something that comes up here. It may come into the court's thinking about whether or not they should enforce this law in some sort of way.
One thing I also want to hit on here is the actual potential results of this. If they say that the Modell Law is accurate and should be a law, that doesn't mean that that would guarantee the Browns would stay in the city of Cleveland, right?
Correct. All it suggests is that you get the opportunity potentially to buy the team. As to whether or not you come to terms, can figure out a contract for that, it's going to be a process. So as a result of that, really what this law gives is some leverage to make owners think about leaving a particular area in Ohio. But at the same time, it's not a guarantee that we end up with the Browns in Cleveland. They may still be headed to Brook Park.
When it comes to the actual sale, couldn't the Browns just say, sure, you can buy it for $100 trillion? Is there something in this law that says there needs to be a reasonable price tag listed on the team?
So there's not, and that's part of what courts do. And I mentioned the term imagining. Sometimes what they'll do in terms of that imagining, and I'm using a very vague term there, is have implied aspects of a statute. So they may say that, essentially the statute has a reasonableness requirement to it, that, it has to be a reasonable opportunity at a reasonable price. That being said, I mean, that's one of the many questions that we have about whether or not this law will end up being enforced.
This does seem to be headed to court. I don't want you to prognosticate anyway, but if you wouldn't mind at least giving us a little bit of insight as to what that potentially could look like, the actual court proceedings here, both sides presenting their arguments on it, but how do you see this at least playing out in part as we start to see this unfold in court?
That's a great question. I think that the Haslams are going to continue to get a lot of pressure on them to stay in Cleveland. I think that this will be part of that. That being said, it's a very vague statute that is clearly designed to keep sports teams in Ohio. I could see a court saying that we're just not sure how to enforce this. If the legislature really wants this type of law in place, then they need to actually provide us more guidance. And that's not uncommon. I mean, we have a separation of powers in regard to how our government's set up. Courts are supposed to interpret the law. The legislature is supposed to write the law. And in some instances, the courts can't do their interpretation because the legislature just needs to provide more.
You answered all my questions here. Yeah, I find it really fascinating that the law doesn't say how much a team has to, or how a team has to arrive to how much they would actually put the team up for. So who's to say that the Browns can't just say, yeah, sure, we'll offer it for, and put the wildest number that you could possibly imagine? That would satisfy the agreement, right? Well, that's according to the law expert that we just spoke to, correct, and that is what they're hoping to get clarified in these court proceedings. This is far from over here. We also have not learned how the Browns plan on paying for the stadium outside of the money that the Haslams are going to put up. The state has been not very forthcoming as to exactly how much money they would be able to give to the Browns. So we're going to have to wait and see on this. All right, many more stories to come on 19 News in about an hour and 20 minutes or so. 3.5 hours of nonstop news starts at CBS. We'll see you there. For now, I'm Jeff Slauson with 19 News. Have a great day and a great night. Much more to come, both on air and online.
19 News, now streaming on Samsung Smart TV. Search